Alec, how's it going, man?
Hey, Ram. It's going great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for doing this. Thanks for hopping on Dads with Mikes. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm it's been something I've been meaning to do. Connect with a lot more dads, connect with yourself in particular, given that we already talk quite a bit online. So it's nice to sit down and have a good long chat.
Yeah, for sure, man. Tell me about you and your kids and your family. How many kids you have?
So father of two, married. I have an older daughter who's 10, and my son just turned 8 a couple of weeks ago.
Okay,
And
nice. They're
and
close in age. That's great.
yeah, they're pretty close. They're pretty close in age. Just over 2 years apart, which is great because they are best friends as well, which is helpful.
Yeah, that helps. Mine too, they're close in age, but they're 6 and 4. But they love each other. They're so affectionate towards one another. It's great to see. They have their moments, of course, and I'm
Yeah,
sure yours have too,
they do.
where they don't get along. But no, in general, it's pretty nice. So, Alec, tell me about your school situation. Look, obviously, the topic of today is homeschooling.
Yeah.
So my first question for you is, were your kids always homeschooled since the beginning, or were they in regular school before, public or private? And if so,
So
what sparked the decision?
so basically, they always were. My son has never known any different.
Okay.
My daughter was in public school for about, well, less than 3 months.
Oh, okay.
We were always hesitant with the system, and it was always something we had a lot of problems with, and we delayed my daughter going to school. So in Wales, where I live, they can start attending school from the age of 3, or it's like a nursery,
Okay.
um, and they can go to nursery full time from the age of 3, but compulsory school age is 5. So
Right.
my daughter went when she was 4, and she turned 5 whilst she was there. But we had a lot of problems, so we did a lot of research and a lot of looking around for some of the schools to figure out what was best. Um, in the end, we chose one. She went there for, like I said, 3 months, and then my employer at the time asked me if we'd move to Toronto to open up a new office there.
Okay.
And so we lived there for 6 months. Well, we obviously took my daughter out of school. My wife took over the education full time and fell in love with it. And she really found her purpose and her calling and was really fulfilled by it. And so when we came back, it was the obvious choice to just continue to do so.
Did something happen within those 3 months that triggered the decision, or like it seems like such a
Um,
short trial?
yeah, so it wasn't, so there was a number of things. Firstly, I was just asked to go to Toronto, Canada. So we did. We weren't going to
Right.
pass up that opportunity. It just so happens to have been timed, so the school term here is September, or the towards the end of September, and we were asked in November to go over at the beginning of January. So with all the breaks they have and the Christmas break, she didn't spend all that much time there. But even those 3 months, we noticed a marked difference in her.
Okay.
So, um, I mean, one of the first and most obvious ones is she was really tired when she came home, like exhausted. It was a really long day for a 4-year-old to be doing all of that, and that impacted her mood, and her desire to do things when she came home. It impacted her relationship with her brother because, we were just describing then, they're still very close, but they were very close.
Okay.
And just because she had no energy and no time, and um, her mood had dropped, she was a bit more short with people, didn't want to do things. And we did, in the short period we were there, there was a bit of bullying that she experienced. So my daughter had always been and still is, for lack of a better word, a geek. She loves fantasy. She loves the superhero stuff. She loves Star Wars, Marvel, all that sort of thing, dragons. Um, and she
That sounds
enjoyed
cool
that a
to me,
lot.
man.
Yeah, she loved that when she was younger.
Hmm.
And she was never really into dolls or perhaps things you might just a doll culture, Barbie,
Right.
that sort of. She
Typical
never liked.
girl stuff.
Yeah, we 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 gave her a doll just with all the other toys we gave her, but she'd never shown any interest in it. She loved
Okay.
animals and that sort of thing, but and stuffed animals all over those, but dolls she just never had any interest in. And so she was always quite a an active player then, as opposed to the more passive play with dolls. She was very, jumping around and pretending to be a superhero. And when we got into the school system, she was immediately almost ostracized for that, in the sense that she came home very upset a couple times that there was one boy in particular who said that she wasn't allowed to, or she can't play with them, or she wasn't allowed to play like that because she's a girl.
Okay.
And that really shook her for a while, if I'm honest. Like, I'm talking a couple of years down the line, she not it didn't impact her going forward, but a couple of years down the line, she may once or twice have brought up that kid and that experience again, and not to the extent where it sort of impacted her life, but the fact that she bring it up just every now and then, made us realize that that's something that's stuck in there, even if it doesn't, even if she's gotten over it now,
Yeah.
it was still in the back of her mind. That memory had still been sort of imprinted in there.
Was this brought up to the teachers or the principal or anybody at the school?
Yeah. So I mean, we were only there for, like I said, a very short period. So
Yeah.
we brought it up a couple times. We brought it up on sort of like the parents' WhatsApp and stuff like that.
Okay.
And there's very little was done.
They brush it
Parents are
off, eh?
quite sensitive. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what they do. They brush it off. I mean, they don't have the capacity to deal with it. They have classroom sizes of 30 plus children.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't believe children that young should be in that type of setting. I don't believe it's the type of setting that promotes a healthy child development. And so you have to understand a lot of those children are going into um, almost a traumatic environment, in the sense that it's quite shocking to their system, and they're going to act out, and it's a long day. They're being, I believe the system pushes them against their nature,
Right.
and so there's going to be pushback from that. There's going to be a negative response to being, when someone tries to conform you against your nature. And so I just don't believe they have the capacity, and perhaps some of them don't have the care to do it. I don't want to comment on people personally, and I couldn't, because we haven't really been in the system. But I confidently say they don't have the capacity to deal with 30 plus children.
Yeah. And you were saying how the days were long. What did it look like exactly in terms of schedule? Was it a typical school day? Like, how early would she go?
Yeah, it was 9 o'clock, wasn't it? I think nine
9?
o'clock is the start of the school day, so she'd be there maybe 10 to 9, and then 3:30, I think it ends. Yeah, for
Okay.
younger children.
Yeah, I
Prime.
can definitely relate to what you're saying in terms of the long days because my son, he just started kindergarten this year,
Hmm.
and his schedule is uh it's 8 to 3.
Yeah, that's a long day.
It's a long day, and he has to be on school grounds like at least 15 minutes before, so that, to make sure that he start on time. So this means like he has to be there 10 to 8 in the morning, which
Yeah.
means that we have to wake him up at 6:30
Mm.
just for him to the morning routine, get them dressed, breakfast, get cleaned up, and ready to go. So that's it's at the latest we can wake them up at 6:30, which is, look, for a child is to me is that's pretty early.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
huge.
have noticed exactly what you said, that most of the time when he comes back from school around 3:15, he's done. He's done for.
Yeah,
He's tired. You see it. He still has some energy left, and the fact that his younger sister is there, she makes him play so that it spikes him for a moment, and that for the time that they're playing together. But they are long days.
yeah. It's a huge day for a
Yeah,
small child. But all that mental and emotional expenditure to make it through. What's that? 7 hours of schooling.
right. I'm glad at least that well, at our school they have, I think it's four recess,
Mm.
so they do go outside.
Yeah, yeah.
20-minute chunks. It's not a lot, but they go out 4 times a day. What does it look like for you right now? How much outdoor time versus inside sitting at a desk with mommy? What does it look like in terms of outside exposure?
Yeah. My kids are outside a lot.
Okay.
An awful lot. So certainly when the warmer months, I say the warmer months, it's not the cold that bothers us here. It's the perpetual rain. And as a homeschooling family, you develop a certain level of resilience to the rain, because you wouldn't live in Wales if you didn't go out when it rained. But we have had the wettest winter on record here in Wales.
Oh, really?
So it's been pretty. There's been a lot of rain, and it gets to you. But during the drier seasons, the kids are actively out of the house doing something. 3 days Monday to Friday, and
Okay.
then in between that they'll be out playing. So my wife will actively take them out 3 days of the week to go do something. Typically, that's swimming in one of the outdoor pools that's in our local town,
Okay.
to the park in our local town, um, or just on a nature walk to either talk about nature and do fit work that into science or geography or some other lesson, or just do lessons outside. There's days where my wife will just take them out in the backyard and
Okay.
pull up some chairs and they'll do lessons in the sun. And then in between that, of course, they're playing, and then we go out on the weekends when I'm not working. So they spend a lot of time outdoors when in the drier months, and then in the wetter months, this they just get out when they can. And that's the beauty of the schedule with homeschooling, and the beauty of the flow of homeschooling is we're in a position to say, oh, it's not raining, get out. Go take advantage of the
Yeah,
fact that it's not raining right now. We'll finish picking up whatever academic lesson we were doing when you come back. But the sun's out, go outside.
that's great, and that's what the flexibility of the schedule
Mm.
enables you to do, right? As opposed to, in schools, it's everything is scheduled, so there's no acting based on, oh, is it nice out? Well, let's go outside. Obviously, there's none of that. If it's math time at
Yeah,
9:05,
exactly.
it's math time at 9:05.
If it's raining during recess and then the sun comes out 10 minutes after recess has ended, that there's no new recess.
Oh,
Recess time was 10 minutes ago.
yeah. One obvious question, obviously, would be, what does the curriculum look like? Is it given to you by the schools board or the government, or how
No.
does it work over there in Wales?
So in Wales and in the UK in general, we have no. Obviously, there's a UK national curriculum that the schools teach.
Right.
It's not given to you, but you are free to do as you please in terms of curriculum if you elect to homeschool your children. We use a combination of things, which again is part of the beauty of homeschooling. So we pick and choose, and that's something we've sort of figured out over the years. What works, what we like, what we don't like, what fits with the children's interests. So we use a combination of the UK national curriculum,
Okay.
We for many years we followed a nature curriculum as well, which was tied to UK weather, flora, fauna, all that. So it was very week by week it was seasonal. So one week would be, you know, if we were teaching this week, it might be signs of spring. So it was tied to sort of the seasonal timetable as well as the school timetable. We used a curriculum called The Good and the Beautiful. So that's a US based curriculum, and
Okay.
we used that for a couple of our subjects. And then we just mix in bits and pieces here and there,
So,
depending
so
on
you had the
our
freedom to
children's
pick and
interest.
choose
Yep.
and just go with it, and there are no restrictions. Okay, but so then that begs the question, how are they evaluated if they want to
Well,
get, I don't know, over here there's a high school diploma they're gonna need to
yeah.
get tested on.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can sit exams. So like the school exams, what would be the equivalent of a high school diploma
Okay.
um, here as an external candidate at a public school, or alternatively, they can sit them at a local college. So there's no, I mean, obviously, you have to teach your children to the knowledge required for the test or the exam, but they can just then, when all the students are taking their exams in one of the halls at a school, they can go in and sit as an external candidate.
Materials on the test and what they'll be tested on is based on what? It's based on the curriculum provided by the
Yeah,
schools, right? Which
yeah.
your kids are not following. But
Well,
so you're making sure
they
that
could
they're
follow.
following whatever you're getting, whichever curriculums that you mentioned that you're providing to your children, you're making sure that it's at least similar or equivalent to the school system.
Well, for some subjects, yes. So I guess it really depends. I would say for things like maths, science, there's not much variation in the curriculums. By teaching your children a fundamental understanding of maths and a fundamental understanding of biology, chemistry, physics, you kind of cover most bases anyway.
Right. Math is math, right? I mean, you're not gonna,
Yeah.
there's not another type of math that I haven't heard about that you're teaching them.
No, exactly. So if we were to do that at a later stage, then all it would take was to understand which examination board, because there's a couple of different examination boards here in the UK,
Okay.
which one we'd be using, and then you would just understand what was the topics that would be required to be covered in that exam or in that period, because
Got it.
they spend 2 years teaching for the exam, so they'll go through their school, the school system, they'll go through the curriculums, and then is it ages 15 and 16 over here, they'll specifically essentially train them on the content required for the exam, so that it would just be sort of plugging maybe little holes here and there.
Have your kids, so are they tested once a year? Is it once per semester?
In,
How does it work? Are there
in
terms?
public school, they're tested every once a year,
Okay.
and so they'll have exams at the end of the towards the end of the school year to determine sort of what just to determine their ability in that subject, and
Okay.
then the following year they are put into classes that reflect their ability or the general ability. So all the people who scored highly on biology would be in a higher ability biology class in the following year, and they'll do that every year until, of course, they go for what is equivalent to the high school diploma, perhaps,
Right.
and then they'll sit the exams and be graded accordingly.
Your kids, are they homeschooled? Are they part of a co-op community or is it just
They are, yes. My
yourselves?
my
Yeah.
wife my wife is co-organizer for our local co-op, so
Oh, okay.
they're pretty involved.
How many children per co-op?
There's about 20 to 30 in our local one. There's
Okay.
other ones. When I say local, I mean ours is 5 minutes up the road, because my wife is co-organizer and there's a venue available 5 minutes up the road.
Nice.
Um,
Convenient.
but there's other co-ops within driving distance, and then they have this sort of core children that they meet once a week, or have a scheduled meet once a week within the venue that the co-op is held within, where they do lessons together. And then they'll meet up other times in the week anyway with other people. Sometimes they're part of the co-op, sometimes they're part of other co-ops.
Nice. So the schedule is again, it's flexible. And do the parents have a say in it, or like how often do you want to bring their kids, or is it Monday, Friday type of thing?
So it just runs 1 day a week,
Okay,
on the Wednesday, and they might so just the way the venue works, because the way venue has to be paid for.
got
Um,
it.
this is just a degree of commitment for the month. You can turn up as little or as often, you can turn up every week, or you can turn up no weeks, but that's really on yourself.
Right. It's not to your advantage not to go as often, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, they run, I may be biased, but they run a pretty tight ship
Okay.
academically in co-op. They're very thorough lessons, they're very engaging lessons, and so I think, it's a benefit to any child who attends.
So why the co-op then? Is it I have a guess as to why that might be. Is it for the whole socialization aspect of homeschooling that might be lacking if you just homeschool them at home and there's no not within a community, or what's
Yeah,
the
so
advantage there?
no, there's a number of reasons. Socialization is one. Um, so it's one method of socialization that our children, one solution to the socialization aspect of homeschooling that um, we provide our kids and the other children in the wider community. Obviously, my children have spent all day out today with kids in the street, because kids just make friends with any kid that lives near them.
Sure.
And they do extracurricular activities. They meet up outside of the co-op with their co-op friends. So they do a lot of other things for socialization. But socialization is one point for the co-op. The other is, or another one is fostering a sense of community.
Right.
We're all there working towards a shared goal. Fortunately, we all have shared values. There is sort of an ethos to the co-op, and that's for some people, and it's not for other people. Some people may disagree with the ethos and some people agree, but that's just that there's enough around to cater to anyone's needs, really. So you just the community builds upon itself those who have shared interests and shared values. So it's great for that, and fostering a communal spirit. And then the other one is skill sharing, knowledge sharing, resources. There's parents there with skills that we don't have, and we have skills that other parents don't have. And so, because it's a co-op, everyone contributes. And some
Okay.
days that might be something as small as just helping set up and clean up afterwards. But in other weeks, other parents are teaching lessons, or sharing skills, or helping the children organize a play or a reenactment, or teaching an academic lesson, or helping them cook a recipe, that sort of thing.
Can anybody join these, or is there like
Yeah.
a
I mean,
criteria?
there's, typically there's not a criteria other
Okay.
than you should be homeschooling. But again, because most of them have sort of their own ethos, I guess. Some co-ops are much looser in that they function purely for socialization, and so the kids just go there and they play.
Okay.
Um, so that sort of filters out the people until you find the one that matches your needs, what you want, and the people there that it's run by the people and shared by the people that share your values and your sort of, like I said, your ethos. So for some of them, there's just certain requirements in that, like I said, that I say our co-op, my wife's co-op, because I'm working when it runs, is very much or is more academically leaning. They have loads of time to play while they're there because they spend the full day there.
Okay.
But they also provide structured lessons on topics that they agree upon each week. Whereas others, some people might not believe in that structured approach. I think one of the many sins of public school is homework. Of course, our academic teaching, the time spent teaching academically, is significantly reduced than if they were in the public school system. I mean, they get and the approach to learning is a lot different. So, I mean, we you use the term homework. Most of these kids are really excited to do the lessons and do the projects, and um, so for example, where the theme at the moment is ancient Greece.
Okay.
So the cooking lessons, the history lessons, the English literature lessons, they're all centered around ancient Greece to sort of give a holistic educational approach to the topic. And my wife organized a craft to make Spartan helmets out of card.
Pretty cool.
And so they learned about Sparta and Spartan warriors and the history, and then they started making these crafts, and it's a pretty complicated craft, and they fit a lot into the day. So there's a lot of playing as well afterwards. The kids run a small. I'm going to use the word tuck shop, and I don't know if that means anything to you,
Tuck shop?
but tuck shop,
No.
yeah, almost like a little cafe where they make teas and coffees, and they sell cookies and
Okay.
bakes and stuff that they've made themselves to the adults.
Okay.
So they run that themselves, and they use it to fund things for themselves. So they fit a lot into the day. So it is homework.
Right.
But obviously the kids are psyched to take their
Outside of the co-op, basically.
home. Yeah, yeah. But the kids are psyched to take their projects home or learn about the lesson or continue learning about the lessons they began at the co-op.
Generally speaking, and you touched on it a little bit, are all the children extremely motivated, somewhat motivated? Do you still have the couple that are like, oh, I don't want to study today. I don't want to do this lesson. What does it look like in terms of interest?
Yeah, I mean, every child is different. I have a daughter and a son, then they're totally different when it comes to learning.
Right.
My daughter can sit there, pick up a book, and tell you everything she just read as soon as she's finished it. She can just spit those facts out to you,
Nice.
and she can apply them as well. And so it's not just a case of memorization. She genuinely learns whatever she reads.
Okay.
My son, not so much.
Okay.
He is very much a typical boy, and so and sometimes you feel like so you'll be my wife might be reading an extract or something, and my daughter will be sitting there calmly and patiently, and my son will be trying to balance on his head. But if you ask him a question, you bet he'll be able to answer it. And he'll just come out with random. You think you've taught him nothing, and then all of a sudden you realize he can apply the knowledge, and he comes out with these sort of interesting thoughts based on what you taught him. So there's different levels of interest, and that's why we try to. Oh, that's why the co-op caters with different subjects. The way it's taught, the cooking's very interactive. They try to make the lessons very engaging for everyone, and the kids tend to, or the lessons tend to get taught based on the types of children as well. So whereas school is organized strictly by age,
Yeah.
that's
So
not the
within
case.
your co-op, you have kids from different age ranges, right?
Yes, yes, we have toddlers, from 3 years old because they have siblings, all the way up to teenagers in the co-op. And
And they're
so,
learning the same things, or they're split at least split
yeah,
into the
so
older and
yeah, I mean, there's sort of a loose age split, but it's more sort of ability and interest. They generally taught some of the same things. So certainly for my daughter and my son, my wife teaches them exactly the same thing, but she may make it a little bit more complicated for my daughter than for my son.
right.
So we don't teach different subjects for history, for example. So if they were in the school system, my son might be learning about medieval England, and my daughter might be learning about the Titanic.
Okay.
Whereas my wife just picks a history topic and teaches the topic to both of them. And it's the same with science, and the same with all, aside from maths, where they have very tailored curriculums based on their skill level.
Yeah.
Um, because maths, everything builds on top of each other, doesn't it, year on year? Um, Whereas history, geography, science, that sort of thing, the kids do the same lesson. It's just my wife might make it slightly more complicated for my daughter, or slightly less complicated for my son.
Right. So they won't cover like algebra, let's say just an example. at the same time because maybe a
No,
6-year-old who's in the co-op with a 13-year-old,
yeah,
generally
and
speaking, the 13-year-old will be more comfortable
exactly,
with that.
exactly, and just using my kids as an example, my daughter is more advanced at maths than my son because she's 2 years older.
Exactly.
So with that sort of subject, there's no, it's harder to blend. I wouldn't say ages more than it is ability, because
Okay.
my daughter does get, is working on maths with children who are older than her, because she's quite gifted when it comes to maths. So
Right.
one of the core principles is never limiting by age, because
Okay.
that's one of the I guess one of the other sins of the public school system.
Yeah, and look, you're right, and I noticed it too. And it's not necessarily because, I mean, obviously it depends on the range, but or the age difference. But for example, my kids that are close in age, 6 and 4, we've noticed that the 4-year-old has an ability for math with numbers, I should say. She's not doing multiplications, obviously, but in terms of knowing that, recognizing the numbers and adding, she's more advanced than my son was at her age.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not necessarily an age thing. It's like you said, it's mostly, and it should be mostly about ability. And I have to agree with that 100%. Let me ask you, Alec, how is homeschooling viewed in your area? So I want to say Wales, but I mean, it's probably just a regional thing, maybe. I don't know. You let me know. Is it frowned upon? Is it more accepted now in 2024? Do you find yourself constantly having to defend it? How is it going for you in that sense?
Yeah, so it's moving in a direction. It is, it's becoming more normalized, um, becoming more considered as a genuine educational option for more people.
Okay.
Um, that's sort of the general thread. You do get, or at least I still get a lot of questions.
How
And it's
tired of you
still,
of answering those?
yeah, I know, right? Uh,
And here I
and
am hosting a podcast about it and drilling you with questions.
no, no, it's fine. Yeah, it's moving in a general direction. Momentum is gaining,
Okay.
uh, but I think the public school system is so ingrained, and it's not just in the educational system. It's just so ingrained in
Society.
life, in many
Right.
facets of life, that it will take a very long time to unpick. Culturally, the UK is a bit more, it's that sort of stiff upper lip. Let's just get on with it. Um,
Okay.
so even if there are problems, or people acknowledge problems, they're a bit less inclined to do things about it and just suck it up. Um, and we're mired in tradition. We're an ancient country, um, and we still have a monarchy, and we still have
Right.
lots of very traditional systems, and that. So I think,
School is one of them.
and
Right.
the public school system is a very traditional culture. So there's movement is slow but gaining momentum. I would say here, it's nothing like the States at all. The States are way ahead of us
Yeah.
in terms of accepting homeschooling and normalization of
Yeah, I get
homeschooling.
that feeling too. And I ask because look, in here in Canada, I don't personally know anybody
Mm.
whose kids are homeschooled. I'm in Montreal. Look, granted, it's a big city. We're in a suburb, but still, I couldn't name you one family that I know who's doing homeschooling. We've heard of what they call them. There's a not too far from our area. There's a place called it's a forest school.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of those. So it basically their classroom is just it's they're outside all day,
Hmm.
but it's not common at all here in Canada. You
No,
ask anybody here, they won't be able to tell you where there is one. You'd
yeah,
probably get laughed off.
yeah. I mean, it's similar here in the UK, and I think there's a
Okay.
there's a lot of similarities between UK and Canadian culture.
Yeah.
Um, when we were in Toronto, we did find other homeschooling families.
There were?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That
Okay.
my kids spent time with while they were out there, and we still maintain contact with now. So
Okay.
there are some, but I guess it's very much I guess very much like the UK in the sense that you have to be looking for it to find it,
Right.
and it's not just. I mean, I've never been to the States, but I imagine in the States it's just, oh yeah, someone someone down the road homeschools.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody that lives in your neighborhood? They're thinking about homeschooling and or they, they've heard about your children and how they're doing, but they're hesitant. They're hesitant because they're not sure how it's going to affect their careers, their ability to get a job. Uh, we've talked about the socialization aspect, but that, I mean, it's just so easy to get them to socialize with other kids, through the co-op, like you mentioned, or signing them up for soccer or football, as you call it in Wales. Any sort of activity, piano lessons, whatever. It's just
Hmm.
so easy to get that covered.
Yeah, it
So
is.
for everything else, though, let's start with, finding a job that will recognize what homeschooling has done for your children. What would you say to that?
Yeah, okay. So I would say, so firstly, they can sit the same exams all children can sit. So really, there's no discrepancy when it comes to that. And
Okay.
as someone who's worked his way through a career, um, and has applied for has applied for lots of jobs throughout cycles in my employment history, I know for a fact that people don't care. They care a lot. As soon as you start to work through your first jobs, they care a lot more about experience, and
Right.
if they're caring about qualifications, they're caring about the most advanced and recent qualifications. So university degrees.
I guess what I'm
Um,
asking is like, how would the employers view it?
I
Maybe, I don't
mean,
know, in the UK, maybe it's different, but I'm not so sure in North America,
but
especially, well, in the States, look, they have the whole Ivy League system, right? Where obviously it's you take two candidates for a job, one who went to Harvard, one who went to a community college, as they call them over there.
yes,
Who
yeah,
do you think they're going to pick?
yeah,
Culturally, they obviously favor Ivy League schools. Is it the
yeah.
same thing in Wales?
So I would have thought so. I think that sort of bias and structure is still there.
Okay,
Um, Probably, the UK, the US, Canada. But I would have thought it's only relevant in the most extreme of cases. So if we're talking Harvard and a community college, then
right.
the it's almost two ends of the very large spectrum
Yeah,
of what we're going up against. But if you're talking some local university, um, then or it's difficult to pinpoint exactly. I think there's always going to be biases where it's Cambridge and Oxford in the UK. They're the
right.
most famous, prestigious of institutions
Yeah,
that go back centuries. Um, there's always going to be people that see the name and just want the name.
sure.
I think I can confidently say that the public school system and the education system, even private school, it doesn't prepare you for life, right? It prepares you for further education.
Prepares you for a cubicle life.
Yeah. Whereas homeschooling children, by and large, they have a lot more skills. They have more social skills because the socialization is far more effective. And that's a hill I will die on. That the socialization in homeschooling is much better for children than the socialization in the public school system.
I believe you.
Right. So they bother with a lot more people from different backgrounds, different age ranges, adults. Every time I see it, more homeschooling children are more confident talking to adults than public school children because public school children are constantly, in this authority submissive relationship with a teacher. And so it's always this sort of, oh, they're scary. We need to be frightened of them. We need to only speak to them if it's necessary. But, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. Um,
That's fine.
there's a lot more skills that are developed and um, just from socialization, from the lessons that are covered. We teach our children a lot about finances. Like I said, they run their own cafe. So the experiences they get are vastly different to the public school system. And, if we're going to take the States as an example, because the homeschooling population is far higher there,
Yeah.
they get jobs. They get jobs at the end of it. So
True.
it's not like this international unemployment rate for homeschool children.
Yeah.
They're going out and they're earning money and they're getting jobs, whether that's through employment or self-employment. People are doing it, and I think you will always have those biases for Harvard, for Cambridge, for Oxford, where people think I want this because that's where I went and they're the best, and we have this
Probably
that sort
depends
of
on the industry and the employers themselves, right? The big companies or maybe I don't know, in the financial sector. I'm assuming I'm making assumptions here, but probably depends on the sector of activity, right?
yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. But I mean, even then, it's a case of you could say we're comparing a homeschooling student and a Harvard student. But that
Yeah,
Harvard student, if the name is important, the Harvard student is going to be anybody who goes to any other university anyway.
right.
It's still not going to another university and going through the system, still not going to compete with someone going to Harvard. We're talking through a very narrow lens here of what someone's career is going to be when they exit education.
Yeah, of
Homeschooling
course.
is homeschool and that's the lens of public school. That's the lens of the education system. Get in the education system, you're going to get this job and you're going to work this 9 to 5 job. Homeschooling is so much more than that. it's it's not an education. It is an educational choice, but it's so much more. It's a lifestyle, and you factor everything in: the well-being of your children, their social skills, their competencies, they're developing a love of learning, and teaching them that learning never stops, that learning is key to growth, that failure isn't a bad word, which again is another sin of public school. Um, so it's far more of a holistic approach. That the public education system is a very narrow lens. It is, you go in, you do these things, you go out, you get your 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And we could talk about comparing how well they do at getting those 9 to 5s, but that would be a tiny slither of what homeschooling is all about.
Do you even want them to get a 9 to 5?
Exactly. Exactly. Times are changing.
What's the worst part about homeschooling?
um I mean, I don't feel there's any negatives per se that you can't overcome if you do it properly, and you do it, um you plan accordingly. You could say having only one income is, it's a big sacrifice, because my wife doesn't earn money because she's
Of course.
teaching the children full time. She runs the co-op. um so we're on one income.
Right.
So you could say that that's a negative, potentially, but it's going to depend
Depends
on
on
your
your
value.
lifestyle. Depends how
Yeah,
much
depends
do you want a
on
life
lifestyle,
of
depends on
luxury or
and what do you value? Do you value the latest iPhone, or do you value more time with your children?
exactly.
It's so I don't want to say there's any real, if there's a negative to the homeschooling, you're doing it wrong.
Two
Yeah.
columns, pros and cons. So there's nothing in the cons column.
I mean, nothing you can't overcome,
Right.
nothing you can't plan for. I mean, so there's pitfalls you can fall into. You spend a lot more time with your children. So it can be, obviously, the children go to public school, you get a break from them, right? You spend time away from them.
Right.
Uh, so you just need to, but you can do that as a homeschool family. Again, the one wage, but or the one salary. So, but that depends on what you value, how how much you're willing to sacrifice, what the sacrifice means to you. Um, and these are just pitfalls. Your wife spends so much time in teacher mode. You have to remember to swap back to husband and wife mode. It's just those so there's pitfalls,
Yeah.
but they can be overcome.
Right. It's manageable.
Yeah, yeah. There's pitfalls you can fall into, or traps you can fall into. Um, and don't get me wrong, we get bad days like everyone else.
Yeah, of course.
Uh, there's sacrifices we're willing to make, and you can overcome them for the most part.
Have you ever come across a family that started with homeschooling and failed? Meaning they set themselves up to homeschool their kids, and after a while they went back, well, either went back or put them in schools because they
Yeah,
figured, we can't do this. And
yeah,
what happened?
it happens. It does happen. Homeschooling is very romanticized,
Okay.
much like the whole homesteading and that's that sort of lifestyle, it is very romanticized at the moment, certainly on sort of our side of Twitter.
Yeah.
Um, so it can be a bit of a culture shock to people when you realize A, how much you have to sacrifice, and B, how much you have to commit to it. And it's much harder for those who don't start from the beginning, like my wife and I did.
Okay.
So if you've spent, if your kids have been in the system for 6 years and they come out, it's a culture shock. All of a sudden you're responsible for something you were never thought you would ever be responsible for. You are responsible for their education, you're responsible for their socialization, you're responsible for all these things that you've otherwise outsourced and never had to give too much thought to.
Right.
Um, and that sort of makes or breaks people. It's very difficult to cut ties with the system. So some of the older children as well, they the system's comfortable. They know the system. All their friends are still there. Or so their peers are there that they would just generally have fun with, but also that they can relate to. Those people are still there, and all of a sudden they've gone from this social group to being on their own because they can't bother with them, from the hours of 8 and 3 because they're in the school system.
Yeah.
So there are many people who have gone back to the system,
Okay.
and those people generally then leave the home schooling circles. So you can never really know how much, how they do.
It's like two separate clans and they can't mesh.
Well, we the kids don't care. It's just sort of the scheduling
Yeah.
that sort of inhibits it. Of course, my kids play with kids in the street. They go to extracurricular activities, 2 or 3 times a week in the evening with school children because none of them are home. None of the other children in those classes are homeschooled,
Okay.
so they mix fine. It's just sort of the scheduling clashing, because the freedom and flexibility of homeschooling means that we don't want to be tied to the school schedule.
Right.
We can do things. Everything's really quiet because everyone's in school and work.
That's
And
true.
the last thing you want to do then is go to places that are really crowded and um, because there's you can go when they're not.
Do you think that a family that has sent their children to public school or private school, doesn't matter, and after a few years decide to give it a try with homeschooling, is that an easy transition? If
No, it's
so,
not.
if you ever met a family like that, parents that are considering it after a few years of school, what would you advise to them?
No, it won't be. It's not going to be smooth, right? Like I said, this is an entirely different way of doing things. It's not a gradual transition. This is what it's black and white in the way you're doing things. There's no gray in between where you can take your time. Don't try and replicate public school. You'll fail, right? You do not have the resources. You don't even have the need to replicate public school, but you don't have the resources that they
That's not
have.
the
You don't
point,
have
right? You're trying to go against it. So,
exactly. But many people will think, right, oh my gosh, I've got to fill 7 hours of this day with academics. How am I going to do that? No, you don't need to do that at all. That's
right.
not what it is. You can homeschool in considerably less time.
Okay.
Even if you have 4 children in the house, considerably less time than if they were attending a full day of public school. If you are going from public school to homeschooling, I would say give the children a break. Don't go, oh, they finished on Friday, Monday we're picking up homeschooling. No. As much as you need to as much as you need to sort of detransition from one system to the other, your children do as well. They're the ones in the system. I mean, people say something about a month for every year they're in the public school system. Just just give them a bit of a break, and then bring and then go into it for for formal structured education. I mean, I fully believe children are always learning. Living is learning, and that's sort of a mantra we have in our community. But you can't go from the public school system on Friday to the homeschooling system on Monday, unless the children
N-
are sort of like teenagers and they're prepping for exams and stuff.
Yeah,
But
but even
when
then,
they're
you need a little buffer.
yeah, exactly. Give them a break.
Mhm.
Just give it to them. Allow them to decompress and de-school
Right.
is,
I
is,
like
is the
that.
term they use.
They
Because
need, they
they're
need to
so
cleanse all
yeah,
the schooling from them.
so used to operating in a certain way that their body and their mind and their emotions need time to adjust. So if you're going to go in, finish Friday, start Monday, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a
Yeah.
lot tougher than it used to be, and you're going to set yourself up to fail. So
Alec,
there's
we spoke about this a little bit offline. So obviously your children would be considered, well, what's considered elementary school ages.
hmm,
How does it look like for high school?
so
And so how do you transition to that? And can parents teach their children high school subjects?
right. So a number of points there. Firstly, so fortunately, my both my wife and I are university educated, so we have a degree of education ourselves that we can pass on to our children.
Okay.
Um, we don't know everything we teach our children. My wife will sit in the bed next to me reading up on whatever subject she's teaching the children tomorrow, but
Okay.
she doesn't know it.
Right.
She doesn't know everything she needs to teach. She just learns what she needs to teach. Um, the
Is that
co-op is
stressful? Sounds like it would be
no,
stressful to have
no,
to learn. No?
it's fun. You'd be
Okay.
surprised at the cool, the cool things you learn or you relearn,
Yeah.
and all the interesting bits of information that you reteach yourself. All the different trees, the different animals, the different events across history. You find actually that for the most part, it's pretty cool. All the things you relearn, right? The co-op is another one. So you may think you lack skills, or you may think you don't have a certain set of knowledge. Chances are one of the parents in your co-op will, and it's
Okay.
an exchange of resources. So maybe you'll pick up their slack and they'll pick up yours. There's loads of online free resources. We use online free resources. We use some YouTube channels that are, run by very intelligent people. Some are former teachers, and they're great. They're really useful tools. And the most important one, however, when you start to get to that sort of high school level, when the children are getting 15, 16, 17, homeschooling teaches agency. It gives agency to children, whereas the public school system strips them of it. So in the public school system, they have the teachers to guide them and tell them exactly what they're learning. And this is the only information you need to know. Homeschooling is your education is your responsibility, right? And as you go through the years, you go from homeschooler or teacher to guide, and they go from student to self learner. So you are year on year, you're equipping them to take responsibility for their education, to self-direct, to become self-directed learners. And by the time they get to that level of knowledge that they're acquiring at 15, 16, 17, they're doing most of the work themselves. You're not
Okay.
there holding their hand. You are there to guide them and help find information or help point them towards information. But they're learning themselves. They're teaching themselves. This is the way you do, the way you raise them is designed to pass that agency on to them. So they take more and more work off you.
Okay. And I guess it would be the same after if they want to, let's say they want to become a doctor, med school. They would,
I mean, yeah, they just do the exams required. They study up on the knowledge they need, and they work towards going to med school. The key point there is just agency. Many children leave the public education system and think, oh well, what do I do next? I don't know how
yeah.
do where do I go? What do I do? And I feel a lot of that's why a lot of children end up going to university, is because it's safe and it's comfortable. It's a continuation of the education system,
Right.
and they know that. They don't know the real world. They don't know getting a job and that sort of thing. At least the education system itself doesn't teach them that. But you just encourage responsibility and agency through the way you teach and through the way you raise them, and they teach themselves.
What's the biggest takeaway for you? What has homeschooling given you and your family in terms of what has it brought to your life?
It's improved every aspect of my life. It's improved fatherhood. It's improved my marriage. It's improved family unity. We have a shared mission, a shared goal, and that's something, we don't split in the morning like typical, children go off to school and everyone goes off to work. I work from home, so it's great in that sense. But the family unit stays together. My children get along better. Um, we're more fulfilled. Every time I recount us moving to Toronto and beginning the homeschooling journey, I always tell people I fell in love with my wife all over again because she found what fulfilled her. She found her purpose. She found her calling, and it was just like a completely different person. And on top of that, the freedom we have. I travel sometimes for work. My
Okay.
kids and wife come with me sometimes because they can. They go explore new places while I'm working at the office, and they get to go all have all these fun adventures exploring things. But I can do that because we're not tied to any system. So it just improves every area of your life.
Alec, thank you for walking me through this. It's been like my introduction to homeschooling. Because like I said, it's really not common here in Canada. Well, at least not in Montreal or Quebec where I am. So I appreciate that very much. Where can people find you on social media?
I am on X or Twitter. I still don't call it X. Um, at Fathers Reforged because Fatherhood Reforged does not fit in the handle.
Got it.
Um, but I am, at Fatherhood Reforged on Twitter. I do have an Instagram, not as active on there at the moment.
Okay.
Um, and I do have a YouTube channel and a podcast, The Reforging. But I am always happy to answer a DM, talk about homeschooling, talk about fatherhood, talk about marriage, anything, talk about masculinity.
Yeah, I think this, we could have gone on even longer. I think I'm gonna have to schedule part two with you if you don't mind.
No problem. I could go all night if it wasn't so late here.
Awesome. Thanks again, Alec. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure.